Hello, all. It is Tim and Tyler here, TnT. Ending the week on a quiet bang. There's a bit of fatigue. We're very busy, and the pollen, at least for me, is kicking my ass. So
your weak West Coast body.
God, I wake up every morning like our eyes are all dry, and you guys don't understand. We live literally in a strip. We live in this strip of like it's like. There's pollen here and there's pollen here, and then there's this middle ground called god-awful pollen, and we live right in the middle of it. And you're like, Yeah, I mean, like, it'll get so bad that you feel sick. You just feel sick. So, no, I've got my espresso plus coffee here to kind of wake me back up.
Can you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to start off with my bitching immediately. Okay. So, for the uninitiated, each week we go over kind of a top 10-ish list, which are basically the highlights from the team. This is certainly not everything. There's always lots of other little bits going on, but this is a lot of the main points of what we're working on this week. We'll go over everything, and then we'll do a bit of Q&A. Everything, and then try and keep your questions focused from an engineering and art perspective. This will not be a design heavy stream, which is typically something you want to wait for Ben and Mark. So if you want to ask me about how AOEs and crowd control are going to work, I'm not the person to answer. No, let's not do that. If you want to ask me,
ask him how we're gonna render AOEs on this.
Well, even rendering them, that's kind of even a technical thing. I'm more like, does it look like pretty fire or not? Okay, so let's go ahead and start off. The top 10-ish is 14 items. We've actually had quite a few items for several weeks. You know, this can waffle anywhere between 10 to 20 items, but for several weeks we've actually had a lot of different things going on. And I think that's primarily because we were at first focused on a lot of the Siege scenario stuff. If anybody watching this hasn't seen that, you should totally go in and jump into one of the playtests we've done up to beta 2 at this point, more than once.
I'm not sure. Mark and I were looking into that earlier. We did one at least last week, during the week. I don't think we've done a weekend one in a while.
Yeah, and 2 weeks back we did a late night test for West Coasters. Sorry, random things that jumped into my head, which I'm not going to comment on, but I guess I just did, so it's too late. So if you haven't jumped in and seen that, it's totally something to behold. And honestly, it's one of those things where we started off like, this is crazy. And then, typical Mark or Ben fashion was, let's add more. And then it got crazier. And I mean, honestly,
our knob just starts at like 11.
Yeah, and then it just keeps going up. And, well, what do we do? I remember when Mark added, we had the 200 trebs, and I think we only started out with like 20 or something like that, just kind of strewn across, and then it went up to 200, and I was like, well, shit, Art better get working on making these a little more performant and get the LODs in on them. But if you haven't had a chance to see it, it's pretty amazing. Each day, like when I look over at Mark, who's like maybe taking video or something of it, or just running a play test, it's just a screen full of particles and trebuchets, and the cool thing is all those things
exploding buildings.
Yeah, I mean, and the trebuchet fire is all actually tracked. I mean, it's not just the fact that there's a trebuchet there with a player commanding it. It's the fact that entity is it an entity? The actual ammo flying through the world.
Yep.
That thing is tracked on the server, and everybody, they will collide in the middle of the air, and it's something that we've seen in the past when people were doing their own abilities, like segue into the ability builder UI getting put back in, which I'm excited about. Players were able to like literally shoot each other's fireballs out of the air.
And so we'll segue that into number 2. I'll go back to number 1 here in a moment. So number 2 is the ability builder. It's back. AJ and Christina and JB and Koo and all the UI guys and all the ability guys have all been working on that quite a bit. It's back in. We've got ITs have access to Nuada Prep right this second. We're running around and finding the low-hanging bugs on that so that hopefully we can get alphas in early next week once we've put out the worst of the fires. But it looks cool. It's fun. You can make your abilities. It's not programmer art. And because of that, people are already starting to make new skills, make new builds,
Yeah,
cool gameplays coming out.
You can
of
name
it.
your abilities. You can pick the icons.
There were guys earlier like shooting their projectiles into the air and trying to pick them off with different skills, and so it's back. It's cool. It's great. Once we start shooting out the emails, keep your eyes open for the inbox. But we won't be doing a test this weekend because it's not quite ready.
And granted, for the testing going on now and future testing, with the ability builder, try all different kinds of stuff. You know, we really depend on you guys to just try a bunch of different weird combinations, see what breaks, let us know if anything funky happens. It's honestly a crap load of fun. I remember making lots of little abilities to hold guys off, you know, and back up and then nail them with a big fireball or something. And you can just basically create your own playstyle.
Yep. So that was number 2. Number 1 is work in progress doors. So we've started work on doors that work as doors. Besides basic animations and permissions, we're looking at the tech needed for portcullises, drawbridges, how they interact with players. Unfortunate enough to be hit with them as they open and close. So there's all kinds of design, be it actual like gameplay design or tech design going on in and around doors. We got a bunch of folks spinning up on those. I think we've already started
Meetings.
Some of the code on that. I'm not 100% sure on that, but lots of work is happening in and around doors, and those are going to start taking shape.
And obviously this is a fairly big item simply because it's a complex thing to tackle, as simple as it is. There's a whole lot of design.
It sounds like, oh, it's doors. It's a thing.
doors.
It opens, it closes, it breaks. But we've got there's design about how it interacts with enemies, how it interacts with your realm, how it interacts with different kinds of damage, what happens when the building falls down. There's actually a fair amount of...
This is a lot of different systems that are all getting put into a door.
Yeah, there's a bunch of interactions that happen there that we're trying to get right the as much as possible the first time around. And so, yeah. Even though doors doesn't sound very exciting, there's lots of really cool stuff happening there.
Yeah, and it's going to change a lot of gameplay.
Yep.
You want to just keep going?
Yeah, sure. So, number 3, ECTs. Christina upgraded the item ECTs to allow for state overrides from the editor. This allows designers to make special items in the world that have non-typical item stats, such as an extra strong keep door in a scenario. So our ECTs, a lot of those, it stands for Entity Component Templates, and it allows us to sort of package up a bunch of different components and then reuse those throughout the worlds for various things. But sometimes, like, in most cases, a door is a door is a door, but maybe in a particular scenario or maybe in a fancy keep, you want an extra burly door. And so this allows us to override things like that and have sort of deviant one-offs. Another work in progress on the design side of things, Various. Ben has been working this week on speccing out the framework for the entire game world terrain, designing how ships work, as well as working on the design of doors. And there's a smattering of new siege engines that we're working on with Mark and other team members. So there's all kinds of different design docs getting written up and conversations happening with designers about cool stuff like terrain, ships, doors, siege engines.
Like what kind of stuff? Trains, ships. You're welcome.
You get the next one.
I get the next one. Okay, movable siege engines. So, it's another one of those things that may sound simple, but once again has a whole lot of different interactions and a lot of different systems. I'm sure that this is a physics, gameplay, design, animation, entities. I mean, I don't know how many different systems this is going to envelop, but basically being able to move a siege engine is a fairly big thing. And we're starting work on that. There's nothing more specific to say in that one. You want me to keep going?
I'll get the next one. Slash command key binding. Mike D added some handy time-saving functionality that allows the devs to create and bind several slash commands to a key, just to help us iterate on
slash
various...
hover, slash speed, slash admin, do it all at once.
There's like lots of like admin and dev commands that we use that get used like sort of bundled up a bunch and reused, and so we can all sort of make them more accessible to us and easier to use. The ability book. Now that we have the ability builder, AJ is working on a place to store all the abilities that can be created, and the ability book will be the repository for your creations. And so sort of the flow there is you go into the ability builder, you make an ability, which puts it into your ability book, and then you would take it from your ability book and put it on your ability bar.
Yeah, I was going to say at some point we should get JB back on a stream, which I'm hoping he's listening because he's going to be going like, because there's a whole bunch of like cool.
Tim totally
functionality.
misrepresented this.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say like
That's not really what it is.
getting one of them in here to talk about it would be a good idea. I mean, just looking over the shoulder, there's a lot of stats and stuff that get tracked in the ability book to let you know like how I'm going to say it, tracks chocobo racing standards and other. I'm just going to make up stuff and get JB to come in.
This is how we get sued.
Yeah. So basically, it does a whole bunch of really cool stat tracking that a lot of players like.
What's our next one? Animation system. But you talk about this.
Okay. Animation system.
Animation
so added functionality. The animation system blend curves. This added functionality is a fundamental need as a precursor to the variable timing functionality of our ability system. However, this can be used for all animations, allowing us to determine speed over time. An example would be taking a basic attack and switching up its timing to begin quickly and end slowly. How do I quickly?
So where we're coming from is the entire animation used to be played back at one speed.
Right. So typically in the ability system, well, here's the great example. The ability system, what it would do is it would speed up or slow down the animation. So the character would basically go from here to here when he stabbed you, and he'd do it faster or he'd do it slower. But technically, what we want to do is we want to add impact to that. There's the artists. What the artists bring to animation is a lot of that character, and sometimes little subtle changes like pushing a frame to the back or taking a frame out of the thrust can really change how the animation feels. So having the blend curves will allow us to actually do things where the character might, if he's going to start the animation and come back and then hit you, instead of just we play it faster or slower the whole thing, what we can actually do is kind of ramp in, start slow, and speed up.
So you can play, for instance, you could play the first half of the animation much slower to sort of charge it up or wind it up, and then the second half of the animation much faster to get that sharp, quick thrust and impact. And so it's not one constant speed across the entire animation. So the art team can build one animation, but we can get sort of lots of different uses.
So the variable timing is actually mentioned here because the ability system is meant to have you speed up or slow down based on how you build out an ability, the prepare and the recovery phases of your abilities. And that can be as simple as I'm going to begin bandaging myself and finish bandaging myself, and it could be a weapon attack as well. And what this allows us to do is we kind of broke down basically what the visual intent of the animations were to make them kind of look stylized and a little bit cooler, but then we need the ability system to not just blankly or flat speed up or slow down things, because we kind of lose a lot of that nuance that the artists are trying to bring. So Mike D has basically set this up, and I think it's sitting in review right now, and it'll allow us to actually just pick different ways of changing the timing per clip. So that's pretty cool.
Number 9, Navmesh. Lee has created the infrastructure and framework for Navmesh creation and pathfinding, and has been working on an algorithm to analyze meshes for edges that are impassable based on angle. Obviously, we don't want our NPCs being able to chase you up the impassable terrain. So basically, Navmesh lets you take the geometry that is the ground of our world and figure out the different routes that AI can take through that route. And based off of the rules we have, like how steep of an angle you can climb or not, it can figure out if they should be able to climb that or not, so that like NPCs can't do anything that a player couldn't do.
I could just see poor players testing this. What the hell? Why is he chasing me?
A lot of this solves the problem of like, let's say you've got a U-shaped keep and you're on the far side of the wall. They won't just keep bumping into the wall. They'll go around it. Like it's navigation stuff.
And obviously we have a lot of future uses for this. Yeah. NPCs that players are going to have in the world.
It's going to drive the keep guards. It's going to drive like any like random animals that we have in forests, or like cows in farms, or the monsters that live in the depths, or like spirits or any pets. This is not pets confirmed, whatever, like the spirit pets and stuff like that that we've talked about for existing designs.
Something that's got to go get to you.
Yeah, it'll support all of that. So it's exciting stuff.
I'll do the next one. Tech generated submaterials. So Wiley's developing a system that will allow us to change the rendering parameters of materials in their various use cases. Examples would be things like when deploying a siege engine, we can render the object differently before committing it, like partially see-through, flat color, etc. We'll be able to use this functionality elsewhere in the world to basically make it clearer which items you're interacting with or selecting in the world. This is kind of an overlooked thing that, when pointed out, you'll totally understand. Like right now, when you go over an interactable, I think we did a real quick, like, play a VFX over it. So we put a light on it, there's a shiny thing, and it's like, yep, that's the thing I'm selecting. What this will allow us to do is actually just render the actual object itself differently. It's kind of just one of those things that you normally have to hit in building out an engine.
The rest of this is art, so have a ball.
Okay, mage outfits.
Go.
So I was working on LEDs for the Viking armor this week. Now I'm moving on to creating the female human Valk variations. Basically what we have to do is we take John's low poly sculpt, we fit it to the nude mesh that in theory fits under the characters, so that when you're putting pieces on and off, everything fits. There's not a gap or a seam between parts, because you don't technically wear the gear. It's instead we're actually taking the piece of your like your nude lower arm off, and we put your gauntlet geometry on. So making sure that everything lines up with all our breakpoints is really important. Getting to a good poly count, that's always one of those things that you know sometimes reduction tools work really well at, and sometimes you got to do it by hand to do a good job. And particularly on our engines, since when you're in large battles, you're going to be seeing characters at LOD 0, 1, and 2 all running around you. We have to put a little bit of extra care into making sure that even the super low poly characters still look like pretty good representations of whatever that guy is. And then after that, we take them and we basically lattice them. It's literally a tool in Maya, and we kind of massage them in like clay to fit different body types, like the female, as well as the Valks in this case are a little bit leaner, so we kind of have to just squeeze everything in, snap all the verts, and then it all gets handed off to Joe, and then Joe weights it, and then we get poses, and eventually we'll have some nice new mage poses for the character creation UI and new gear. Next up, Empath Gauntlet. We went through, made a whole bunch of different concepts this week, settled on 2 different choices. The imagery will be in the update. Basically, Empath will have a 3-piece gauntlet, and I mentioned the 3-piece part because we're designing all the weapons in 3 pieces, so that when you assemble them, you can actually pick the different pieces that make up a sword or a gauntlet.
Are we going to get a snap animation?
What's a snap animation? Like this? Oh, the gauntlet. Got it. Sure. That's actually really funny for a fun fidget. Give one guy a... okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Work in progress art animations. So Scott and Sandra are continuing to work through the long list of animations needed to support one-handed weapon combinations. Scott is creating new unique idols and fidgets for sword and shield combo, as well as casts when holding one of these items. He's also begun work on daggers, and Sandra is working on hammer and axe animations with a shield. Basically, the list is long because of all the different combinations of things you can have in your 2 different hands, as well as when you have both the same weapons. So there's a whole lot of work there that is done either unique or paired. We tend to take, like, if you've got 2 daggers, you might stand like this, but then you equip a torch, and now you're standing like this. But then we may find that when he thrusts with the dagger, the torch animation over here no longer looks good. So we do a lot of little massages and end up with a fairly long list of animations to kind of make all that combinatorial stuff work and look good. The first pass, we usually start off with shared stuff, so you might see the same animations for a sword and a dagger, or an axe and a hammer, until we find time to just kind of differentiate those things a little bit more. The last item, ability FX. Basically, Mike and DB are going through all the tags on all the abilities, the pre-existing abilities, plus all the new mage abilities, and making sure that all the VFX and SFX are playing as expected. Additionally, I think Mike was finishing up the last few bits of mage VFX, and DB says he wants to go through and improve some of the chaos magic that he did for the druids. And that's it, the top 14. So, at this point, we can open it up for Q&A. Art and... What is it that you do?
Whatever needs to be done.
DevOps?
Start fires and then put them out.
Start fires?
Then sound proud of myself when I put out the fires that I start.
All right.
I don't know who did it, but I fixed it.
Give us your question.
I bet he was clever and attractive, whoever started
Art
this fire.
and engineering.
Wise beyond his days.
It was a beautiful man that came through and ruined everything.
Everything. But I fixed it.
Dino asks, when can we start to see more art from Depths Monsters?
We don't have plans to work on that immediately. That's going to be kind of a later thing. We're not even talking about the depths right now at this point. So I think, honestly, if you haven't looked, there's a whole bunch of different old concept art that we did for basic variations of some of the races and what they might look like if they got mutated in the depths, but it's not going to be a soon thing. Right now we're more focused on, at least in terms of new art and character art and monsters and things, it's going to be new races, new armor, new weapons. We got to fill the world out with creatures for the world, so there's a lot of basic stuff we got to get through. Boars, things that you're going to gather leather from.
O Bumble asks, have you started outsourcing art assets, or when will that start?
So the next thing that I need to get out of the way is we need to settle in on the tech on how we're going to do tinting and decaling, mainly tinting, as well as crafting, simply because even if I wrote up some of the outsourcing docs right now, there'd be a big blank spot of exactly how to author a lot of the textures. So that is pretty much one of my highest priorities for engineering for us to hit soon, is going to be laying out exactly how we're going to build things. We'll then, the minute you hear us talking about, hey, we're rebuilding some of the art, the textures on the existing armors so that they can be crafted and can be made out of different materials as well as be tinted, that will be the point to start outsourcing new work.
Yeah, and there's also the amount of work involved with overseeing outsourcing is frequently understated in the game biz. As Tyler, who's one of the people that does a lot of the overseeing of sort of the art vision of the game, he does a lot of reviewing and making sure that everything meets up with our art style and standards and all that. That all still has to happen when we outsource.
Yeah, and
you just have 10 times as much things that he's responsible for reviewing.
Yeah, so the thing we need to do is get...
So it needs to get done, but...
We need to get the plan out of the way first, then write up all the documentation. But like I said, pretty much the time you hear me talking about changing textures will be the time that we're like, okay, now we got to start putting together the documentation, the battle plan, how to build everything, and then start outsourcing some stuff. And it's not as simple as that one sentence, like you said.
Strike asks, will the go-to scenario Cherry Keep stick for a while? And if so, what are the plans to put Vikings into it as well?
I don't think I know the answer.
So there definitely has been some discussion about gamifying that a little bit more, or doing something similar to Cherry Keep that is more
game friendly,
scenario friendly. Supports all the realms in different ways. That particular scenario in its current incarnation probably won't turn into like a real big like game scenario. It's tech demo, stress test more for that role. But we've been thoroughly, it's fun right up until it isn't, so we've been learning lessons from it and discussing how to gamify it.
Yeah, and I mean, we mentioned it last week, and I think I'm mentioning it in the update that I was writing earlier, that Ben and Mark have been working on new scenario designs, so I believe the idea is to take all of this stuff that we've learned in all the stress testing and turn it into more of a scenario. But I think I just can't remember if Mark talked about it last week.
Kalan asks, with several fantasy races in Camelot Unchained, are there also plans for fantasy-inspired wildlife as well?
Yes.
Okay then.
Boom. Yeah, I mean, that'll be, once we get to that point, I mean, that'll probably be, we get the Navmesh working, better behaviors. It'll probably start off with simply like, here's a 4-legged thing walking around in the world that has spawned in the world, and then at that point we'll be free.
Sky bisons and platypus bears.
So once we've got like actual NPCs spawning in different areas in the world, I probably will prioritize. We'll probably be prioritizing things like gameplay specific things like guards and NPCs for keeps. But around that time, we'll probably start concepting out, a creature and unique things you might find in the world.
I expect also around a push to turn all the crafting stuff into an actual class, so that gathering and all of that.
Yeah, go
all the support needed.
Go
for
kill
that.
the sky bison.
Yeah. Get you some sky leather so you can make some sky pants.
Lysdal asks, when do we get a server running where we can just play when we got time and not in a test mode?
When we're not
I believe that's beta 3.
testing? Yeah, that's not going to be for a while. I mean, right now most of this is all for testing. It's expensive, honestly, just to run these servers. So it's very focused of, and we try and mix up the time, but unfortunately we just can't make everybody happy. So sorry for the state of that.
I mean, in terms of that, the reality of the situation is we're a small crowd-funded studio, and so we can either pay money to do long servers up for testing, or we can pay money to salaries to make the game. And we know you guys like getting in and testing, so we try and find that balance. Unfortunately, right now that balance means we bias towards salary more than testing, like week-long
and ultimately we don't need very long tests. They're very focused on new features that are getting put in, and jump in, test this feature, and jump back out. Usually the longest testing periods are we've had around the weekends, and well, I guess we've granted over the last couple of weeks we've still had like 4-hour windows of testing.
Yep.
Jack Mode asks, regarding ability FX, are they easily scalable on your end? It can be very difficult to participate in a large battle with FX going off like mad. Would you be able to reduce them easily if the effects become a hindrance to gameplay?
Well, let me start with 2 of those, and then Tyler can approach that from the artistic side of this. So one is, anyone who remembers the old days of Dark Age of Camelot remembers, like, you would go into the big raids, and the first thing you do is go into your settings and turn all your graphics down so your machine didn't lag to shit from all the VFX going off. So performance is always a consideration in our mind. Our goal, and with most things, we'll have some control. You guys will have some controls over some aspects of the graphics to tune it to your hardware. Our goal is to make it smart enough so that it will sort of dial itself back in ways that get you the performance you need even in the big battles. The other consideration that we've talked about quite a bit before, but in case you haven't seen those streams or are new or whatever, the VFX we do are really, really cool. When you multiply those VFX times 2,000 people, you get a lot of visual noise that's difficult to sort of read the room, to survey the battlefield and figure out what's going on. And that is also important to us. So while big, flashy, cool VFX are really awesome, it just sort of turns into a bunch of noise in a giant battle. And so again, we're trying to find that balance between what communicates the situation of the battlefield while still looking cool. And then Tyler can talk about...
Yeah, well, I mean, the small part of this is just a fundamental bit of just trying to make sure that everything is discernible, especially when you're in a chaotic battle. And unfortunately, I mean, that's just going to be something that we're going to have to tune over time. It's not going to be an immediate, oh, we knew all of this was going to be a weird experience, and you're not going to know where that fireball was coming from. So that is definitely something that's going to just have to be looked at as we go. I know that also DB's doing a lot of work with sound mixes, trying to make sure that players have a good idea of what they're supposed to be paying attention to. So if anything in the near term, I know that he's doing a lot of work on the audio to try and help players out with things like that. So for now, probably the audio is one of the better cues, and then later, like I said, once we get through testing, we see how chaotic thing is, and we start realizing, oh, players are getting confused because the acid ball looks like they're friendly heals or something like that. That'll be reason to go in and differentiate things so that we're basically over time making it a little bit clearer as we go. And granted, there is going to be some hectic chaos no matter what. If you're in a giant battle, that is just literally part of the experience of a giant battle. We just don't want it obviously to be frustrating.
Salidri asks, any plans to change the animations for when you are sliding down a hill that is too steep? or making it so you don't lose control of your character?
So it's the latter statement I didn't really quite understand, but losing control of the character. The only thing I could think of that you might be referring to there with losing control was a lot of the jittering and stuff that we had before. There was a lot of kind of minor bugs that basically made the character look like he was jittering, especially when you were changing positions or you were going up and down hills. There was a lot of kind of changing states of like, am I running, am I walking, am I standing still, that was occurring frame to frame. Mike D just fixed a whole bunch of that stuff. If that is specifically what you're referring to, jump into one of the more recent tests. This should be, I don't know which build it's on because it only went in recently. But if you get a chance on Hatch or in the coming weeks on one of the later builds, there was a lot of work done on just all these little jitters and stuff that was happening. Now, the first part of the question refers to, I'm pretty sure, like different animations that would play when you're going up a hill or down a hill. That is something we've talked about. That is something that I believe Mike D has said is relatively easy at this point, and he's got a lot of grand plans, just like all of us do, of things we want to add. I would like to add in something like that so that your character looks like maybe they're heaving up the hill or kind of sidestepping carefully down the hill.
So when did we do Animations 2.0? Was that 2 years ago? When we put in the new animation stuff? Anyways, we overhauled our animations, I don't know, 2 years ago? 1.5, something like that. When we put that in, one of the big considerations was different effects and environmental effects and how they would affect your character. You know, and am I on fire? Maybe I have a different set of animations for running around screaming while I'm on fire. And so that sort of sliding down a hill or being submerged in mud or whatever, like, we factored those into our considerations when we were designing the technology. It really comes down to actually stressing them out.
Well, I was going to say it actually comes down to time and priorities
and
right now.
having the resources to make those animations that are only really going to matter a small amount of the time. So we've made efforts not to paint ourselves into a corner such that something like that is difficult to do. We've attempted to make something like that easy to do, but it really just comes down to the art and tech budget and where we allocate those resources.
So right now I can confidently say that's definitely something that's on our minds, start and stop animations, so that your character kind of leans into as the beginning of a run or kind of comes to a skidding halt. Same thing with different states, whether you're going up a hill, down a hill, you're on fire, things like that. Right now the focus is to get through all the updated styling of the animation, get the variable timing support in there and working so that players are back to using all the different weapons we want you to. We've gotten a lot of tech to facilitate doing that faster recently, courtesy of same engineer, Mike D. So once we get through, and I can also say it's also going faster. If you look at the newsletter that just went out, Scott has an article talking about how much easier everything is to work with and how fast things are going now. Basically, it was just an issue of getting the support, and now that we've got it, we just need to kind of play catch up, update all the styling of the animations so they just kind of look and feel better, they support the ability system better. Once we get through that, which I would love it to be done tomorrow, as fast as we can get through that, then we'll probably start looking at other states. And the one thing you have to remember is that when we put one of these things in, once we get the functionality, then there's all the animations that have to be done. And so we have to come up with creative ways to cover, like, oh, I'm carrying different weapons. Am I going to look different coming up and down a hill with those different weapons? And suddenly, your budget can suddenly grow with the number of animations you have to do for something as simple as walking up a hill. So yes, that specific example is something I would like to do. We got to get through all the weapon stuff right now.
The second part of the question, in terms of losing control of your character, Phyllis,
is that? Go ahead. Is that where you took it from? Like,
yeah.
I thought it was maybe like this jittering thing. Or
yeah,
Lee jumped in to say, losing control. I assume they mean the fact that the character won't accept input while falling, which is what is happening when you're sliding downhill.
Yeah.
That might be a design question.
That's where I took it. So there's a couple things that I can speak to about that. One is that, in general, Ben's philosophy around crowd control leans away from losing control of your character. We don't want you stunned such that you do nothing until you die, or rooted, or even hard silences where you can't use half of your abilities and basically all you can do is walk around. In general, though not always, in general, we try and lean away from anything that causes you to lose control of your character. So in that regard, it would not surprise me if we moved sliding into a direction where you have a little bit more agency than you currently do.
Didn't one of that EverQuest title that was basically a big, I can't remember the name of it, that was all
Landmark?
Landmark, didn't they have like a sliding mechanic when you went down the hill? I could picture us doing something like that basically you're in a sliding state versus a falling state.
So the other part of that on the physics side of things is there's a whole physics state thing that you can be in where you're sliding or you're falling. There's some stuff, some of you guys who have been around with us for a while, where it used to be you could shove guys and knock them back just by ramming into them. All of that, some of the guys were playing around with a knockback on the server earlier. All of that needs another pass. We sort of did the first pass and it was good enough to carry us till now. But it does need some refining. And I would be surprised if sliding, pushing, and knockbacks didn't just get a pass in a couple of months here to improve that experience for all parties involved.
Yeah, if Rob's listening, he's told me many times he loves it exactly the way it is and has no intention of doing anything else to it. That's a lie. Yeah, that's on our short list of to-dos, or at least talked about.
Salitri didn't expect such an in-depth answer from both of you. Thanks, all.
Good.
Ryan Petrie asks on the YouTube chat, will there be multiple spellcasting animations for the same spell, like a Lucrapan casting Firebolt over and over?
So I'm going to start by saying no, because I did pose this question to Ben previously, and one of his concerns was that players really knew exactly what it is that they were seeing on the battlefield. So the idea would be, if you know that what a cast looks like for a projectile, you should be able to go, oh, that guy's about to cast a projectile, and make decisions accordingly. If there's a choice of 3 or 4 different animations that the player, sorry, my phone's buzzing. If there's a choice of several different animations that the player could possibly play, it gets confusing in the world. Additionally, I can confidently say, having worked with the animators, that you start losing ground in the three-dimensional area that players have to do their animations. And I'm saying that's an issue because one of the things that we're talking about right now is being able to tell the TDD guy over there from the Viking guy over there, and they're both holding 2 daggers. How do you tell the difference?
They're both wearing a cowl and a robe.
Right, they look variously similar. So
that one's 6 feet tall, that one's 3 feet
right.
tall, but otherwise.
So, well, right off the bat, like if you've got 2 characters who just could be similarly dressed, who's who? And so one of the things that we've been talking about is different idle positions for the characters to be standing in when they're holding different weapons. And the problem there is you can only go so far before things look goofy. You can't have one guy over here with his daggers up here and one guy here and one guy here. It's all going to look goofy. You have a very small space to work within before it looks goofy. So, sorry, that's a very long version of the answer. So no, not in the meantime. We're going to stick to one set of animations for first one type of ability. So right now all the mage casts are shared. They play, so there's a projectile, a self, direct, an AoE, and I think there's another one, but those are all shared right now. So if you actually see the mages casting, you should be able to eventually pick up, this guy is summoning something and this guy is doing a direct cast. Moving forward, the idea would be to start off with different idols so that the TDD mage kind of stands like this while the Arthurian stands tall and I'm making up arbitrary things, but the idea is that you should be able to look at them and know what's going on. And if we end up making lots of different animations for the same abilities, you'll never know what's going on.
That being said, the tech does support it.
Yeah.
So Mike was griping about it earlier because we had some misconfigured abilities that were like, I'm going to randomly play an animation. He's like, I don't know how to hook VFX up to this.
I would like to do some subtle things, but honestly, subtle things are only really, they're subtle. They're not going to, whether it's going to be a bang for your buck that, the guy underhands a fireball and overhands a fireball. I don't know if that's really going to make much of a difference. It's fun, but I don't think it's going to add to the game.
Was it playing softball or baseball?
Softball or baseball? One thing we have talked about is once we get through all the different animations for the new weapons and all the casts and stuff, is then to start looking at what abilities players have kind of the most fun with, and then do like unique animations for those abilities.
Oh man, I think we had some questions scroll past.
Well, you want me to fill in while you're looking?
No.
Because I got a good story about the lost tarantula.
Is you know what? I feel like this is urgent news.
The lost tarantula?
Strike asks, does the work on doors include potential doors on ships, like for the captain's cabin?
I don't think. I don't think.
Neither of us has been in a ship discussion, so we probably shouldn't comment on it.
Yeah, but I do know that all the door stuff is a lot of the door discussion and tech that needs to be done is around you make a building and it's got to interact with the building and be placeable in the building.
That way we can have scenarios where when you get kicked out of your keep, you don't have to punch a hole in the wall to get back in.
You're helping the other team. I just want back. No, you guys stay out. I just want back in.
I left my good axe in there.
Yeah. Let me back in. Someone hook it over the wall.
Throw me a rope.
Yeah, there's actually some fun design things coming down the pipe for siege engines.
ILR asks, will players be able to move decals around in the UV coordinates? Could we apply multiple decals?
Okay, first off, as stated, has not been figured out. We don't have the tech for it yet. I don't know how far the design has gone, and typically something like that does come down to the tech. However, what I can say is we authored the character art so that everything is laid out in a way that characters should be able to project the decal onto the character, meaning that you should be able to draw it onto the character and go, that's where it goes. That was the way we laid out the art to support that tech. That is not me saying that is exactly how it's going to work, however, until we've actually got that plan down.
A lot of that stuff is in flux, though. You know, we want to give guilds ways of decaling their armor and weapons to represent their guilds. There has been some discussion of, wanting the craftsmen that make their stuff to have some sort of sigil that they could put on the gear. None of that is final. It's all in flux, but those are all things we would like to have given the time, money, and resources.
Yeah, sorry, not the best answer, but like I said, it's not something we've been able to tackle yet.
Dino asks, how customizable can we expect the graphics settings to be on launch? Like, with big battles and effects everywhere, it would be advantageous to turn that all off, but personal preference is I'd rather have them on, but that might put me at a disadvantage.
Honestly, that's just going to grow and change based on design feedback, testing feedback, and what engineering can actually do. I mean,
we're pragmatic about the wide range of hardware that people have at their disposal and will be using to play our game, and we want to support as much of it as possible while giving you the best experience possible. So where we're able to, where we can support it, those are all things we would like to do and will strive to do, just because having a good performant play experience in the large battles is important. Otherwise, we've only delivered half of a large battle.
Ryan Petrie on the YouTube chat asks, my biggest pet peeve in 99% of MMORPGs are shield sizes. There are always tiny bucklers. Can we please have tower shields, and will these slow you down?
Wow, you just reminded me about those shields. And my brain, the little production side of my brain just went, oh yeah, all these other things. So when we did the shields...
that's going to be an hour of Jira.
Yeah, exactly. So let me give you a kind of a yes and no answer as of right now. We did originally design shields of, I want to say we just did two sizes. We didn't do like little tiny I think it's a buckler, this little tiny guy. We did kind of like a big, I guess we could call it our medium shield, and then we actually did make art for big tower shields. However, the part that my brain is now thinking about after you mentioned that was the animation support for those different things. So we did originally plan on different sizes of shields. We did originally plan on large tower shields. However, note to self, and I don't have a pen, is to think about the shield sizes and how we want to facilitate those for animation.
Because imagine you've got a shield that's yay big,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
you can wave that sucker around and not worry about it clipping into your body or chopping your head off or whatever.
Yeah, let me put it this way. I think in the near term, what we will end at what in the right now term almost, with the work that Scott and Sandra are doing with shields and one-handed weapons, you're certainly going to have large shields. They're not the big tower shields. I think the question will be with the large tower shields is, one, what do we want to do with the design of their usage? Are they going to behave exactly like everything else, or are you going to get some kind of defense bonus, and do we need to show that with animation? Because one of the things we did talk about was, like you really hiding behind that thing and kind of defensively poking out from behind it and it behaving differently.
I mean, from the gameplay side of things right now, just in case folks are curious, right now, basically shields, like some of your weapons you can deflect, which is functionally parry. Shields have a higher deflect amount and a lower deflect time, so they just sort of soak up more damage implicitly.
Yeah, everybody has a deflect on a timer, so you'll see your character play deflect animations every once in a while that as it loops through its timer, and there's also shield bash abilities. But that specific question just is a very cool question because it's got a lot of really cool design ideas, and I just don't know where we're going to get to it on that. Whether it'll be like a fully realized design decision where that type of shield is different than other shields, or if we'll end up treating them similar to other shields. But we have done art for it. We have talked about it. I just don't think we have any of them in the game right now. So,
that being said, there's lots of cool stuff that we've talked about with shields. Like, shields aren't one of these things that we add to the After Effect. We're not all about just, raw damage. We had discussed, like, dual-wielding shields at one point.
Yeah.
I think we've canned that idea.
But,
like, we like the design space of shields. We just also have to factor in the production cost of that versus all the other things we can do.
So I will tell you, if we can make the larger shields work with the animations that we've got, you'll certainly have larger shields, and I would not be surprised if they have different stats. Ben will probably take that into account, and you will probably have different types of shields. I just don't think we ever created any of the really tiny little ones.
Yeah.
So, sorry, not really the best answer of what you're looking for, but it is on our radar of something to do.
Saya OUO asks, do you have a rough idea?
I swear, sometimes you're just trying to not pronounce things in certain ways. There was the one earlier that I swear you were trying to not say colon. Colon.
Saya OUO, do you have a rough idea for the actual world map of Camelot Unchained yet? How much of it is going to be procedurally generated, or which parts, and what you definitely want to place manually?
I think that was one of the things you called out, right?
Yeah, so Ben's been working on just the entire layout.
Number 4, design various.
Yeah. There's a giant map that Ben is laying out. If you go back and look at, I think it's one of the BSC videos. We gave Mark a bunch of little cutouts of islands or zones and how they all fit together. Ideally, we want to do most of it procedurally. That's obviously the end goal for a tiny team. We've got a great, very, even in its infancy, the ability to do everything procedurally. The problem is whenever we want to create a very specific area, like a specific scenario layout, or if we have to just go in and go over the entire world and make sure there's not any weird areas players are getting caught in and massage those. So we want to do most of it procedural. We just simply don't have the team size or bandwidth, or honestly it's just stupid. It would take us, the world's going to be huge. It would take us forever to do it by hand. One of the prohibitive things, if you literally look at the last newsletter, Ben talks about this specific issue, is just where we put our time for tools. So one of the main things we need is more tool work on the world editor side so that you can actually use brushes and sculpt. Right now it's a very tedious process to do anything. So for right now, definitely we want to go as much procedural as possible. And like I said, it's just a matter of the number of things we create, and the procedural engine does a whole lot of great stuff.
In terms of size and scale, last week we talked about that tech work was happening in and around the support classes. Those guys are hugely important to the size and scale of the world. Because there are speed classes for you guys that played Dark Age. They'd be your Minstrel, Scald, and Bard. They increase the speed of all of your party members by a significant amount, and they're going to be the shuttle buses that run you around the world. And so their ability to move through the world, to consume the world via speed, is going to be an important factor in how big the actual world is. Also, in case you guys are curious, some of the other factors are like how many players we expect to be on at any given time, so that there's enough room for real estate for everybody, so that you can have plots and stuff like that, and there's no like land wars or anything like that.
And on the other side, we also don't want it to be too huge that
Right.
you can't find anybody to play with.
Exactly. So the support classes going in will be one of the big pieces of data that we need once we get the feel for those guys right to actually set the scale of the world.
And in all honesty, that's kind of a fairly easy thing to tackle. If you look at any of the older videos of me working in the engine, it's like, oh, I need to remove a kilometer of terrain. Boop, there it goes. Oh, I need it back again. Boop, that's back again.
Oh man. I've got two questions competing for ending question.
Well, ask them both.
Let's dive into both of them. All right. Well, this one's
So the rest of you guys are screwed.
Yeah. Those two win.
So this one came in first. So real life Gabo asks, is there any new tech you are looking forward to working on or with?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. My high level priorities are rendering and lighting. I really want George to find the time, or have someone else do it on improved lighting. There's basically a 2.0 version of lighting that I'd really like to get to, which would just kind of settle down exactly how we're authoring the art, the crafting, as well as tinting, decaling, and assembly of weapons and armor. And there's I'd love to get like a full-time DevOps person to kind of work on the, just the infrastructure of everything that I'd like to, make it easier for art to not get blocked by engineering and things like that. And those are all on the radar. They just haven't happened yet.
The player in me, I really like making builds. I'm the guy that's always like fiddling with builds. So having the ability builder come online is real cool. I can start dabbling in builds and skill bars and stuff like that. To that effect, getting the ability bar online is exciting, so I can actually have real estate for all the cool shit I make. And similarly, some of the next iterations, like Tyler was saying, we're going to eventually be moving into a place where like you don't craft a sword from iron bars, you craft a hilt and a crossbar and a crossguard and a blade from bars, and then you combine those. And so once that sort of more finalized crafting comes in, that's the sort of the second half of the build. So as a player, I'm excited about making builds with all of the crafting and ability
the ability builder, I was going to add that in. Like, that just went in, and with all my copious time, I love playing with that thing. That's just fun to play with.
From a programmer side of things, the engineer in me, I think I've talked about it before because this question comes up every now and then. We've got a lot of servers that we wrangle, and right now it's mostly done manually. And I would really, really like to build a tool that's just sort of a conductor or choreographer of all the servers that we have online and brings them up and down and provisions them and all that. And we've talked the tech on that a little bit. It's just because we haven't scaled up real huge, there hasn't really been a hard need for it. And my time is very limited. Tyler and I both, everybody wears a ton of different hats. And so something that isn't needed right now isn't done right now. So I'm excited to participate in the creation of that when we get the time and need for it.
All right. And then another nice question possibly to end with. And 5-minute warning, folks. Lodoween asks, it's been 6 years since funding this week. How much would you say your aspect of the industry has changed? And how has that impacted what you do on a daily basis?
Well, industry change directly related to what I do on a daily basis. One of the things that I've been doing art mostly for my whole career in some capacity, and at one point I said that, like, when I was at EA and I was working on games, I would do maybe 4 props, or a whole room in a day or 2 days, 4 props in a day. And now, as the expectations and the tech has grown, now I need a 4096 high res map with 4 materials, and it's got to be lit well, and it's got to be 20 times the poly count of what we used to do. So there was a lot of stuff like that just became more and more expensive and prohibitive, and that's why you start seeing, like, the classification of, like, those AAA titles where they pour a lot of money into it. It's got to be a successful game. There's no chance that you can't fail on those things. But only in the last few years, there's been a lot more art tools. Things that I don't have to make everything from scratch in Photoshop. I don't have to hand paint everything. There's a lot more tools now to actually author the art. It's basically like the tech just increased so much, and the art was taking so long that everyone was like, we got to make some better tools to be able to do this. So now the time has started to fall back off again, and that's just been a lot of fun. I mean, I don't do art all day. I have to do a lot of production and oversight type of things. But, looking over Dion or John's shoulders where they're actually hand painting materials with specific instructions as to how those materials behave over different angles on the surface is just awesome. You had to do all that by hand. I remember painting a table leg and painting the wear down the corner. Now you can just go, wood, done.
Yeah, for me, like, we talk about how many hats we wear, and so when we say, like, my aspect of the industry, that's a really wide brush because of all the hats that I wear. On the tech engineering side of things, I hadn't really dabbled with multi-threading very much in the last 5-6 years. Like, we've gotten stuff like Ryzen's out that have consumer grade dozens of
It's literally called a thread ripper.
Yeah, and so, like, having the hardware at consumer grade level to do high power multi-threading things, and then being fortunate enough to work with the guys on the team here that are really experienced at multi-threading and willing to spend their time to help bring people up to speed. It's really cool watching that grow, and at the same time watching, not to dig on other studios, but there's a lot of other studios out there that just aren't doing multi-threading and not taking advantage of a huge part of your hardware. And so it's cool to be doing that and to be in a place where I can learn that and to see the hardware keep up with our needs. That's been really exciting and cool. And the server side's doing the same thing. I mean, we're doing a ton of stuff on our servers. I'm one of the guys that goes out and I talk to all the cloud guys to make sure that AWS is the best home for us. And seeing the different hardware that they've got out there and talking about other game developers that similarly on the server side aren't multi-threaded. So that's been really, really cool. Me personally, I've started as a low-level junior engineer when I started here. Now I help do some of the management stuff and learning about the different philosophies and processes. Tyler has a little bit more experience production than I do, and so learning some of those stuff with and from him has been really cool. And blessed to work with someone like MJ, who's been in the business for forever, and just watching how the game industry has evolved and getting his take on business development and he helps us understand, like, oh, well, why did this company do this weird purchase of another game studio? Why does that matter? Or why is it weird?
Yeah, there's often, I'll come in on a Monday and be like, Mark, this article I read, what's your take on it?
Yeah. And so seeing the game industry grow and evolve and having someone to help me sort of understand the biz dev aspects of that has been really, really cool too.
Awesome. Seems like a good place to stop.
Yeah.
It was a big question. My head was just kind of thinking of all the different ways things have changed.
Well, you got 1 minute to see if there's anything else you want to comment on.
Or
no. I gotta do another espresso shot and write the update and get that done.
Speaking of which, keep an eye out for our end of week update email, which will have all of the top 10-ish, all 14 or some other number of the top 10-ish.
I was just going to add in,
items?
you did comment on the testing.
Yeah, no testing this weekend, but keep your eye open for emails next week. We've got that ability builder stuff. Once we get some of the low-hanging bugs knocked out, we really want to hammer on that hard, get you guys in there, making abilities, breaking abilities, the whole 9 yards. So expect those to go out early next week. We'll probably call in the alphas the first part of the week. Hit any fires that you guys start/find.
Tell us where the VFX don't line up with the animations. Poor Mike is probably going to murder me because Scott just put in a whole bunch of like different animations, and I'm sure they're like, I know they're already off. Like you thrust with the sword, and the little thrusting VFX is like over there.
So yeah, no test this weekend, but I fully expect we'll be doing lots of testing next week as we punch some of these bugs in the face.
Awesome. I guess we'll see you later.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
cool. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.